Hey, Richard, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, the xMonks Drive. Such a pleasure having you here.
Great to be with you, Garth.
Um, Richard, for a long time, I've been looking forward to having you on this show because of several reasons for the kind of work that you're doing in the space of software service industry, the kind of culture that you've been able to create, and the generosity with which you are just sharing the best practices with the world. So, the entrepreneur, a software developer, culture creator, and let me not miss it out, the author of the book, Joy Inc., and one more. Let's take a deeper dive into knowing Richard from the very starting. Richard, if you may share an episode from your life, especially from your childhood days. And because right now I'm sitting in my daughter's room, would love to hear your initial childhood days and those memories that bring a smile on your face today as well.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I am what we like to say here in my home state of Michigan, a pure Michigan kid. I grew up in the state of Michigan, which is right up against Canada, and you can see it from outer space because we're the state shaped like a mitten because we're surrounded by the Great Lakes. And I touched a computer for the first time when I was just a kid in high school. 1971, way back in 1971, 50 years ago.
Wow.
This year, I touched a computer. They were very different back in those days, and I was only 13 years old at the time. But I typed in a two-line program into that computer, and it clacked out on a roll of paper, "Hi, Rich," because that's what I told it to do. And I was hooked. I knew what I wanted to do the rest of my days. I thought this software thing would be so cool.
Hmm.
And eventually, I went to the University of Michigan, got a couple of degrees in computer science and computer engineering, and started a career in this field. And the career looked perfect. I was very good at what I did, and I kept getting raises and promotions and stock options. And, the world was rewarding me, telling me I'm doing a good job. But
Hmm.
inside here, I knew I wasn't. I knew that things could be better.
Hmm.
I was watching chaos. I was watching poor quality going out the door. I was watching everybody being frustrated. I was frustrated. I was working very long days, spending time away from my family, and we just weren't delivering good results. And I will be honest, by my mid 30s, I wanted out. I didn't want to be in the industry anymore
Hmm.
because I just felt so dissatisfied and so disillusioned with my work. And my wife, one day, she looked at me and she could tell I was frustrated. She could tell I was sad. And she just said to me, she said, "You don't look happy." And I said, "I'm not happy." She said, "What are you going to do about it?" I said, "I don't know." I was scared. This was how I was feeding my family. This is how I was keeping a roof over our head. And there I was, well trained, pretty darn good at it, and thinking to myself, I don't know how I'm going to do this for another 30 years. And quite frankly, at that point, that's when I decided I had to change. I had to make big changes. And I started reading lots and lots and lots of books.
Wow. So, what I'm listening is creation has always been a very important part of who you are as an individual. And also, what I heard you say is a deeper need for good quality. Tell me more about that. So, from working in an organization to starting something of your own, how was the transition for you? Because I come across so many people and they continue to think about one day I would like to start something of my own. And especially if I go 15 years back, getting into something of your own was not that easy. It's only
Right.
now everyone is talking about being a startup founder.
Right.
I'm sure that was not the case.
I had always imagined that I would one day have my own business. I don't know why. There's some basic entrepreneurial heart inside of me. I never imagined it would take until I was 43 years old. So 30 years since that day of touching a computer for the first time was when we started Menlo in 2001. But it was in the later stages of my career where the idea of a startup company started to come closer and closer, because in the last couple of years in my traditional job before I started a new business, I had transformed a tired old public company into something that looks like this. I had gotten back to the word joy in my career. And I think I probably would have stayed there for a long time, except in 2001, the internet bubble burst. And suddenly I was out of work for the first time in my career. And I went home and told my wife I'd lost my job. And she looked at me with tears in her eyes and she said, "You're unemployed now?" And I said, "No, honey, I'm an entrepreneur now. I'm going to start a new business." And she didn't know exactly what I meant at that point. But I knew that while I could lose everything, I lost job and title and authority and paycheck and stock options all went to zero. I lost everything except for one thing. They couldn't take away what I had learned in those 2 years of transforming that old public company into something that looks like Menlo does today.
Wow.
And so that learning was what I carried forward into this new business. And you're right, it wasn't easy. Certainly wasn't simple, but boy, was I was so excited about this because I had seen a picture of what Menlo could be in those last 2 years of my old company.
Yeah. This is so interesting because what I just heard you say is that I lost title, I lost my job, I lost employability, I lost, of course, a monthly check, I lost the pseudo pride in saying that I'm a vice president, I'm a president. I'm sorry, I'm calling it pseudo pride because having known you for some time, I know the heart that you have that beats for creativity, right? Your soul dances when it experiences freedom. What I also heard is you lost everything and you gained your freedom.
Yes,
right?
that is true.
Now, you also mentioned, Richard, that you were frustrated anyways while working in those organizations because somewhere you were not, as an organization which you were a part of, we were not producing quality. Tell me more about that. And I'm very curious because, today also, if I look at people invest a lot of time, money, energy on building softwares. We have burnt our fingers a couple of times. We invested, but at the end of the day, the product that we got from that organization was not at all in alignment to what we were expecting or anticipating. Tell me, what was the struggle that you were experiencing, and why do you say it was not of good quality?
Yeah. There is probably no more exciting time for a software engineer than somebody says, "We have a new project for you to work on." A clean blank sheet of paper. You finally have this, like, this time we're going to do it right. This time we're going to get it right. This time we're going to make something that has great effect in the world. And I will tell you, there is no more delight in the heart of a software engineer than to see their work get out into the world and delight the people it's intended to serve so much that they come back to you and say, "I love this product. I love this thing you created. Thank you. You made my life better because of your work." And I'll be honest, I had all these new projects that I started where I started out with grand excitement, and I never got to that outcome. Because what would happen is I never got to actually meet the people who would one day use the software we're going to create. And so you'd be in a room with a whiteboard and you'd be making all these guesses about, well, I think people would really like it to work like this. And I think they'd really like it to work like this. But you never really knew. You just made, we were intelligent people. We could sort of imagine what would it be like to be a customer of this product. And then your planning process was so poor in those days. Some manager, high-level man, "How long do you think it'll take?" And you'd say, "Well, I think it'll take us a year." And they're like, "Well, what could you do in 6 months?" I'm like, "Well, I think it'll take us a year." I'm like, "Yeah, but we're only going to give you 6 months. And how many people do you think we need?" "Well, I think I need about 6 people." "Well, we're going to give you 2 people." And then they push you and push you and push you. And then they say, "Well, let's get it out the door." And you're like, "It's not ready. it doesn't work yet. Oh, that's
Yeah.
okay. We'll fix it later. And later never came.
Mm.
And so then you'd ship this inferior product that didn't actually meet the needs of any users. It had bugs in it everywhere. And then the phone would start ringing off the hook with problems. Angry customers. Why does it do this? It should do this. It works like this. It lost my data. It crashed on me. And now you're spending all of your time trying to fix problems from the past. You're spending no energy going forward, no energy improving the product, just simply patching it up, trying to make it work as best you can, trying to apologize to the people you intended to serve. Rather than hearing them tell you, I love this, they're telling you, I hate this. This is the stupidest product ever. I want my money back, and you're just scrambling. And so the only way to go faster is overtime. And now you get tired. Now you're making more mistakes along the way. And the people who were paying you to do this, your bosses, were like, I never told you to build a crappy product, which was true. They never said build a crappy product, but there was no way to communicate to them. It's much bigger than what you think. We need to do a lot more effort. We need more people. And so none of those things would work. And that's where I was frustrated. Going home at the end of a day thinking, I got absolutely nothing done. I am not proud of the work I did. The people who work around me aren't proud of the work we did. The customers aren't happy with what we created. The management team that paid us to do this great work are. And then eventually, many of those projects just got canceled. The management team, well, I guess it was a good idea, but we didn't execute properly, so we're just going to throw this all away. And then they come back and say, so now we have another new project. And after a while, you're like, no, I don't want another project. Even though those new projects, again, is the spirit and energy of the entrepreneurial spirit inside of a software engineer. Like, oh, I get to work on something brand new. I get to change the world at what I do. And I would never get there. And I thought there's got to be a better way.
Thank you so much. And I think that was the inception of Menlo Innovation. Now, interestingly, I've been thinking for the last few days, Richard, that how come a software developer, rather than writing a book on how to develop softwares that customers love, the gentleman wrote a book on how we build a workplace people love. Very curious, because software developer requires left brain thinking. And what you are talking about is building a workplace that people love is a right brain thinking, or if I may say, it's a whole brain thinking. What was that trigger point for you that led to this shift, rather than focusing on only developing world-class softwares to creating a workplace that people love?
When I look back, I realized that at a certain point, my deep trough of disillusionment, when I was thinking I'm just getting out of the industry entirely, I decided, and there was actually a friend of mine who was a consultant to other businesses, and she's a really good friend. And I said, Kathy, help me. What should I do? And she started pulling books off of her shelf. She said, I think you should read these books. And intriguingly, and I loved the books she gave me, books like Tom Peters' In Search of Excellence, Peter Drucker's books on management, Peter Senge's book, The Fifth Discipline, on the art and practice of building a learning organization. And I loved these books. They inspired me. They showed me there was, in fact, companies that did succeed where I was failing. They didn't tell me how to get there. But what I recognized in those books was the problems I faced were not technology problems. They were human problems. How do we organize the humans more effectively? And suddenly my personal focus shifted from being a programmer who was thinking about, really important technology concepts and frameworks and structures and all that kind of stuff, to a leader that was thinking about how do we organize the humans more effectively? And that became, by the time I was probably 36, 37, 38 years old, my burning passion and desire was, I've got to figure out how to organize the people more effectively. And that has become my main focus of
Yeah.
my attention probably since the middle 90s and has continued to this day. And that's why I write books about building workplaces that people love. Because here's the thing, and here's the most important thing. What does every company on planet Earth need today? They need creativity, imagination, invention, and innovation. And guess what? That comes from this really human part of our brain. And that part of our brain is the part of our brain that literally shuts down when we are afraid.
Mm.
When we go to reptile brain, when we're in fight or flight mode, we lose those most imaginative part of our humanity. And so part of it for me was creating a joyful company where when people walk in, they feel safe enough to be creative, imaginative, innovative.
Now, help me understand. And I understand that you have been in this space for over 2 decades now, right? Now, Richard, help me understand. What do you think? What, according to you, are the three most important pillars, or I may use the word levers, of building a culture, a workplace that people love?
So number one, do whatever you can, and we can talk specifics here if you want, to keep the human energy of our team high. You think about all of the conversations that are going on in the world today about energy, whether it's fossil fuels or solar or wind or hydroelectric energy. But I would declare the most wasted energy force on planet Earth today is the human energy of the people who work for us. And the Gallup Group has been measuring organizations for decades. And it tells us that 60 or 70% of people in most organizations are literally disengaged at work. Imagine the lack of everything, lack of productivity, lack of output, lack of caring about what you're doing if you don't have human energy about what you're doing. And you know what? All of us, you might hear and say, what does he mean by human energy? You can walk into a company and literally feel the human energy of the place. It either sucks the life out of you because there's no human energy at all, and you're like, I don't even want to be here. Or you walk in and you're like, wow, I want to work here. Right? Imagine what an attractive force this is. Everybody's struggling with, how do we get new people to join here? How do we solve the talent war that's going on around the planet? Lift up the human energy of your team. Now, one of the ways to get there is to decrease the bureaucracy of our organization. Don't form committees to write policies. Take action versus take meetings. Be clear, unambiguous. Give people a chance to go to work and get meaningful things actually done. And then the other force, and I use the force of work on an airplane as the analogy for this. So there's that lift of human energy, overcoming the weight of bureaucracy, and then the thrust of purpose. An externally focused purpose that's clear to everyone. Why are we doing what we're doing? Who are we doing it for? What would delight but for the people we intend to serve? And that thrust of purpose overcoming the drag of fear. I will tell you, most organizations operate in fear.
Wow. Tell me more about that. When you're talking about the thrust of purpose is going to overcome fear, the moment you said that, I could actually experience goosebumps. Tell me, how can we actually help our teams to imbibe the purpose? And that could allow them to overcome the fear which might be created by bureaucracy, or we might have our own fears, our own insecurities, right? Very curious. Tell me more about that.
So think about how many of us, and this would certainly include me, were led within our organizations. It is often with fear, right? We use fear to try and motivate people, right? You start, there's this famous story of some boss that just fired 900 of his employees through Zoom the other day. You don't think that generates fear with an organization? The next time the boss invites you to a meeting, and you're like, oh my gosh,
Of
is this my
course,
turn,
of
right?
course.
And so we often invent fear in order to motivate people. We artificially motivate people. I had a boss once who, when I worked in a cubicle back in those days, on a Friday afternoon, about 4:45, just before quitting time, he would hop into my cube, say, how's it going? What you working on? Well, he should know what I'm working on. I mean, we give him a status report every morning. But then he asked the key question, you almost done? And if the answer was, well, I'm a little bit behind. Are you coming in this weekend? And of course, the answer had to be yes. Of course, I'm coming in this weekend, which I had no plans to do because I wanted to spend the weekend enjoying my family and that sort of thing. But when I left the office that Friday afternoon, I could feel this heaviness in my chest because he was able to deliver that fear on a regular and consistent basis.
Mm.
Now, all I'm thinking about is, how do I get him off my back? How do I make sure, and of course he's like, well, that's the way you motivate people. Like, no, it's not. I wasn't motivated at all.
Yeah, yeah. And that's
Whereas,
exactly what you mentioned when you mentioned that when the reptilian brain has been hijacked, it actually hampers our creativity, our innovation, our the creative juices to flow through us.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yep. And so now we're just trying to survive. Now we're trying to look good to the boss. Now we're trying to put in FaceTime in order to make sure there's no creativity. There's no human energy there. There's no deep desire. And there is no connection to the purpose of the organization. In fact, often the worst purposes in an organization are the ones where it's tied to some financial results that will only enrich the founders, so the shareholders. It's like, okay, what kind of purpose is that? I often challenge organizations to think about this when it comes to their purpose. 2 questions. Who do you serve? And what would delight look like for them?
Who do you serve? And
Here at
what
Menlo,
would
we serve
delight look like to them?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Really focused purpose can really, really motivate a team and take them through very tough times.
Richard, just curious, how do you ensure, and I would love to listen to the other levers as well, but let's take a deeper dive into the energy part that you're talking about, the dance of fear and purpose in an organization. I'm just curious, how, as a leader, do you ensure that the complacency does not seep in the culture?
I think for me, storytelling is a big part of leadership, because often the reason people get complacent, I believe, is because they become disconnected from a purpose. They can no longer relate to that purpose. They can't see themselves making a contribution to the purpose they're trying to create in the world. And typically this happens when every quarter the top leaders, the CEOs, the executives are presenting PowerPoint presentations with bar graphs and charts and spreadsheets, and they're trying to improve performance and key performance indicators by 1.3% and all that kind of stuff. And it's like people are like, oh, I can't help there. I can't move that needle. I can't make a contribution to make a difference. Why should I care? And then I start becoming complacent. Then I start just putting in, FaceTime, and then I'm just, going through the motions. Whereas through storytelling, we can start to tell stories of the people we intend to delight. We can tell a story about the future delivered in a vision. Storytelling is as old a tradition as humanity, right? Every culture on planet Earth has stories of their founding, of their civilization, of their accomplishments, of their failures, right? And we need to keep track of all these stories. And as in history, we tell these stories again and again. And what are we doing? We're telling stories about what do we believe about ourselves as a people, as a nation, as a community, as a team. What do we truly believe? And if, as a leader, if I can connect to your soul and spirit, through the words of a story, because stories, it's less important that you remember the stories. It's far more important, how do the stories make you feel? And if we can tell those stories over and over and over again, over time, collecting more stories as we go,
Wow.
be
Wow.
clearer about the future, we can motivate a team.
Now, this is what is happening at the team level. Now, I'm sure even you would have your investors, you would have your stakeholders. If not investors, you would have your board members. How do you ensure that the energy is taken care at that end as well?
Absolutely. Well, number one, you need to learn how they think. You need to see the world through their eyes. I will tell you, this happened, and there's a story inside of Joy Inc. on this particular story. When I wanted to make the changes I wanted to make back at my old company, when I was a VP of R&D, I kept going to my boss, the CEO. His name is Bob Nero. And I went to Bob and said, Bob, I want to do all these really cool technical things with my team. And he would ask me how much it was going to cost. And he'd say, we don't have time for that. Just go back to work. And I wasn't getting through to him. And then one day, I came and I told him the story of what I was going to accomplish through his lens, through his eyes. I said, Bob, I've been sitting in on the executive team meetings of the company because I was on the exec team. I was sitting through board presentations because we were a public company. I said, Bob, I know we are going to run out of cash before my team completes its work and builds the new products you want me to build for the next generation of this company. And he said, yep, I know that, Mitch. And I said, when a company is going to run out of money, there are 3 alternatives they have to make sure they don't. They can be acquired. They can do a secondary public offering, issue more shares for cash, or they can have a private equity firm come and put money in. And he said, yep, those are our 3 alternatives, Rich. And now realizing I'm not talking like an engineer anymore. I'm talking like a business person.
Yeah.
I'm talking like an executive. And I looked at him and I said, Bob, any one of those transactions, secondary public offering, acquisition, or private equity, they are going to send a due diligence team to the company. And because we're a tech firm, because the greatest amount of people and budget is being spent in my division, they are going to walk down the corridor to me and my team, and they're going to look at my people, my process, and my products. And we are not going to pass muster, and we will not get that money, and we will go out of business. That's why I need to make the changes I'm about to make. And at that point, he literally signed off on the deal that afternoon. Well, what did I do? I told a story to him that actually came exactly true 6 months later. And it worked. They acquired us because they came down to my end of the building. They looked at my people, my process, and my products after all the changes I had made. And they said, wow, this is mind blowing what you've done here. We want to buy you. And they did. They bought it for 10 times the amount of share price that when I had that conversation with Bob just 6 months before. So it came exactly true. But I had to move my leaders with this story.
Yeah.
And I had to learn to tell the story in terms that they understood.
Yeah. So what I understood is, in order to manage the energy, whether we are talking about the team who is reporting into me or my stakeholders or my board of members, one thing that's definitely going to make a shift in terms of taking the energy to the next level is storytelling. Now, the difference is when you're telling a story to your team member, it's about the purpose, where we are shipping towards, where we are navigating towards, where we are moving towards our aspiration. As you mentioned, what do we do? Who do we serve? What would delight look like to them? So that's the team part of it. When we're talking about the stakeholders, looking at the business from their worldview, what is it that they are looking forward to, and how can I contribute in that journey as well?
Yep.
So Richard, that's the energy part of it, right? Now, what are the other pillars or the levers that could help the culture to build a workplace that people love?
Well, I always say if you want to pull the human energy out of an organization, there's a simple 3-step process. Number one, have lots of meetings. Number two, do not make any decisions in those meetings. And number three, if perchance by mistake you happen to make a decision, that's okay. Just don't act on it. And you will suck all of the human energy out of your organization. And so what I encourage people to do is to take action versus take a meeting. Try things. Run the experiment is one of the most famous phrases we have here at Menlo. Because running an experiment gives people permission to make mistakes, to make small, quick mistakes. You see, mistakes are often punished, aren't they? Don't dare make any mistakes. Do everything perfect. Well, if the requirement is to do things perfectly, then we better spend a tremendous amount of time in meetings planning everything out. But we're human. We're going to make mistakes. I don't care how perfectly we plan things. Things are going to happen we didn't expect. So why don't we just embrace our humanity? Why don't we say to ourselves, you know what? We can either choose to make really big, slow, expensive mistakes, or we can choose to make very tiny, simple, correctable mistakes and iterate our way to success. So our phrase for that is when somebody has a new idea and somebody else says, well, I'm not sure that'll work here. I think we should think hard about that. The other person say, I get it, but why don't we try it before we defeat it? Let's run the experiment.
This is like a friend of mine. His name is Chris. And one thing that I've learned from him is fail again. Fail faster, fail better. And when I heard it for the first time, I said, why would you want to fail? And when I started running my own organization, I realized how important it is to experiment. Because unless I experiment, I would not know what are the ways I should not do something. And if I don't know how not to do something, I will never get to know how I should do something.
Well, and think of all the ideas you've had where you can imagine, every one of us can do this, right? You think, oh, I'm going to try this. And you're like, oh, I don't know. This could happen, or this could happen, or this could happen, or this could happen, right? You know what's funny about those this could happens? Virtually none of them ever happen. Now, there's something that's going to happen you didn't even anticipate, and it might be just equally as bad as the things you were worried about, but we're not going to learn. And so then, what we do is, well, okay, I still like the idea. So let's create all these safeguards against the 4 things that I know are going to happen that we've got to prevent. And you start building this really complex approach to this simple idea you had. So you don't have the 4 things. And then that thing that you never anticipated happened. Like, oh, my whole system. Well, tell you what, and I'm gonna suggest a different language than your friend Chris's language. And here's the reason why. I don't like the word failure or even fail, because at least here in the United States, in school, a failure is on your permanent record. It goes on your report card, that goes in your file, and you'll be seen forever and ever as someone who failed at something. And we're so wired to avoid failure that we're so afraid of it. We create fear inside of ourselves about failure.
Yeah.
But here at Menlo, instead of saying fail faster, we say make mistakes faster.
Wow. Okay.
Because the language, I think, sometimes can be very important. If people say, well, it's just a mistake, because what can you do with mistakes? Oh, I can correct them. That's why I like experiments. That's why I like the word experiment. It means you try something, you see what happens, and if it doesn't happen the way you want, you adjust. Try something new. And keeping things tiny, that's why I like faster. So I agree with your friend Chris about that, is don't create big, slow mistakes that are going to get really expensive and we're going to fire a bunch of people because they made that mistake. Let's make small, quick mistakes. Let's try little things.
Got it.
Over and over and over again.
Got it. So what I'm listening is, Richard, the first lever or the pillar of building a workplace that people love is to take the energy to the next level, both at the end of your team members and at the end of your stakeholders. Second point is celebrate experiments, celebrate mistakes. Is my understanding right? What is the third lever?
Pump fear out of the room. and this could be a career for most leaders to change themselves, because I will tell you, I learned how to motivate people with fear because I was motivated. I was taught to be motivated by fear, right? So I bring that myself into my managerial career. When I started leading people, it's like, okay, I've got to make you afraid because that's what my boss did with me. And so there are many ways we do this here at Menlo. I'll tell you a simple one. I sit out in the room with everybody else. No corner office, no barriers between me and the rest of the team. It doesn't mean people still aren't afraid of the person with the CEO title. I get that. But I can knock down a lot of those fear-based barriers if I knock down some of the physical barriers between me and the people who work with me, right? So I sit out in the room at the same 5-foot table that everybody else does here. No gifted C-suite for the CEO and co-founder of the company. No difficult, process to get on my calendar. It's amazing. Right now I have 2 of our newest employees sitting in the same group of tables where I sit. And I've heard them say it. I can't believe I get to sit like right next to the CEO of the company, right? I go, I'm right here, And yeah, if we continually knock down these barriers to making ourselves accessible, can diminish the fear. And then the other thing is teaching the team not to punish mistakes.
So pump the fear out. And you also spoke about creating an open culture in literal sense, in terms of the physical, there should not be any boundaries. Richard, I got it when you're talking about creating an open culture. But at the same time, when you build an open culture, I personally come across there's so many conflicts that start to show up. And conflicts that could be based on the ideas, that people would come up with different ideas. People would have different values that they operate from. People might have their own fears, and they would project their fears onto somebody who they believe is much smarter than them. How do you manage those kind of conflicts in an open culture? What is your recipe for the same?
Well, I often say that a lot of the challenges that we face here at Menlo are the same challenges every organization faces. We just discover them sooner, because conflict is a natural outcome of humans working together. Right? We don't change that here. We are regular people who have our own ideas and have our own egos and all that kind of stuff. But I think we discover the conflicts sooner. We can correct them while they're still small. The biggest problem with conflict inside of an organization, when it's allowed to just sort of fester and blaze out of control, and now you've got a 5-alarm fire on your hands, and nobody can solve it, and about the only way to do it is fire 20 people in order to get rid of it. And then, of course, you just duplicate it again and again and again. And what I would say, and maybe it's another lever in your words, is to create an intentionally joyful culture. I will simply say the word intention is really important. Most companies do not have an intentional culture. They have what I call a default culture. Who did we hire? What attitudes do we tolerate? What behaviors walked in the door this morning? And that's our culture. Sometimes those can work, and then one day they don't. Nobody knows why they worked before, and nobody knows how to get it back. But when you're intentional, it means you can tell stories about your culture. You can see the values at work. You can see when they're not at work. And if you teach a strong system of feedback and set clear expectations during the entire history of the HR process. For instance, how do we recruit? How do we interview? How do we select? How do we onboard? How do we promote? How do we give feedback? All of these things are very, very intentional here. So intentional, I could write a book about it. So intentional, I could speak to someone on a podcast about them. Imagine somebody in your audience says says to themselves after they hear this podcast, I want to go work for Menlo. I want to be part of that company. Well, what have they already learned just by listening to the 2 of us? And then what are they going to do when they arrive to interview? They should be doing what everybody should be doing, comparing. What did I hear in that wonderful podcast versus what am I seeing in the behaviors of the people I'm interviewing? is there a consistency? Because humans are really good at,
Hmm.
at seeing differences between what people say
Hmm.
and what they do. And if
Hmm.
you go into a company that has this great poster and says, we have a wonderful culture, and then the first thing you do is get in there and you see fear and intimidation and all that kind of stuff. You're like, wow, it doesn't sound anything like the culture they have on the poster. It
Hmm.
doesn't sound anything like that guy who was on the podcast. Don't go there. You
Hmm.
should not join a company that has that inconsistent a culture, that the public version of the culture is different from the inside reality.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we have already spoken about the three pillars or the three levers of building a workplace that people love. And let's double click on that. How can we actually put it in action? So you spoke about how are you hiring? How are you retaining? How are you interviewing people? How are you promoting people? What kind of behaviors are we celebrating? Or when are we asking people to move on? Right? Tell me more about that.
Yep. So let's talk first about the culture they're joining, right? Not just in an open room, but two people working together side by side all day long at a single keyboard and mouse. All of our work here is done in pairs. Two people, one computer, one keyboard and mouse, sitting next to each other, working together, problem solving together all day long. And these pairs are assigned and we switch them every 5 working days. So if you and I are paired together this week, we wouldn't be paired together again next week. So, okay, so picture that's the way we work. That's our culture. Those are some of our key practices here, is this idea of two people pairing together. Now, how would you interview for
Precisely.
that culture, right? Because it's so different. I will tell you, virtually no one who's ever worked at Menlo has ever worked in an environment like we have. They've never, I
With the
mean,
same,
maybe
with the
they've
same.
collaborated with some people from time to time, but I'm talking 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
Two people paired together, and then switch the pairs every 5 days. So how would you interview? Well, first thing we do, we invite a group of people in all at once into a big open room. Sound a little familiar? We'll invite 30 or 40 or 50 candidates in, all at the same time, all in one big open room, sitting near one. And we've warned them about this, so they're not surprised by what I'm about to describe. But I still think they're surprised, even though they've read about it, they've heard about it, and so on. Then we pair them together with another candidate, and we give them the weirdest instructions you will ever hear in an interview. Your job is to help the person sitting next to you get a second interview, even though they're competing for the same position you are. So imagine this, you're in an interview, you want to get the job, you've heard about it, so I want to join Menlo. And these weird people from Menlo are like, okay, we're going to pair you with another candidate who's competing for the same position you are, and your job is to help the person sitting next to you get a second interview. Well, you know what people are thinking, like, oh no, I want the second interview. And if their behavior is to diminish the person sitting next to them, if their behavior is to overpower them, to answer every question, to grab the pencil out of their hand and, intimidate them and make sure everybody's paying attention to me, they ain't gonna make it.
So it's like um, assisting others, supporting others over your expertise.
Yep. And so
Wow.
imagine what we're doing. We are teaching our culture from the moment of first contact, because this is our expectation once you join. And I will tell you that that people who join a company often don't get any expectations set. What are we doing? We're setting clear, rational, reasonable, sensible expectations for people. And guess what? When you do that, they adapt. Now, is this for everyone? Of course not. We're not trying to be all things to all people.
Yeah. Did you say it's for everyone? So, I mean, even if you're hiring somebody at a vice president, president, director level, somebody at a senior level, the person has to go through the same process?
Yep.
Wow.
And interestingly, we don't have those titles here. We don't have bosses here. So that's a whole other realm we could get into.
Wow.
But anyways, yes, we go through the same process for everyone because we're trying to be intentional about our culture. Why wouldn't we want to teach people our culture when we start interviewing? When are they supposed to learn it? Like in some training class after they hire in, all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know it was going to be like this. Oh no, this is the way it's going to work.
Help me understand. You said we don't have titles in the organization.
We don't have bosses. There's no reporting. Nobody here could say, oh, that's my boss.
Then how does that work?
Yeah, it's a good question. So everything here. So for instance, what does a boss usually do? Boss makes hiring decisions, right? Here, the team makes the hiring decision because what's happening in those extreme interviews that I talked about, two people sitting side by side, collaborating with one another, a team member, a Menlonian, as we like to call ourselves, is sitting across from them taking notes about what they see. And then those 30 or 40 people, let's say there were 40 of them, there would have been 20 of my team members watching the 40 because they're all working in pairs. So each one of my team members would have seen 3 different pairings, so 6 different people. And then they get together as a group and talk about what they saw. And then they decide as a group who should advance to the second stage of the interview process. The second interview. Second interview, that person who made it through, who was selected by their future peers. Remember, no bosses making decisions here. Is decision made by the team as to who should advance to the next level, is going to come in for a day by themselves and pair in with one Menlonian in the morning and a different one in the afternoon and go out to lunch with a few Menlonians. And at the end of that day, the people they went out to lunch with and the 2 people they paired with are going to decide, should we advance that person to the next stage of the interview? Now, they come in for a full day, so we actually pay them for that day because that's a lot of time. So we give them a small amount of money to come and be with us for a day. And they do real work, not just talk to people, not, all these crazy interviews and rooms and talk about how many golf balls can fit in this Menlo and all that. They actually come in and they do real work for a day. They get to experience what's it like to work here, really work here. And then if that works, they are invited in for a paid 3-week trial where they will pair with at least 3 different peers over the course of the next 3 weeks. And they start getting feedback on how they're doing. Well, who's giving them feedback? Their peers are, not a boss. It's all being done by the team. And then the team so we're public with our pay levels. So everybody here knows what everybody's making. Again, that's a crazy concept. That pumps a lot of fear out of the room.
Yeah.
So everybody here knows what everybody's making. And the only way you make more money here is to move up to the next level. And the only way that happens is through peer evaluation, because who better to judge that than
your team members? Yeah. Interestingly, what I'm also listening in this way, you're not only strengthening the culture of collaboration in the system, in the organization, but also you are actually taking the collective intelligence of the team to a very different level. And because why am I sharing this? Because in my limited understanding, whatever little work that I've done with software service companies, they will say, hey, there's one person who knows the entire process from A to Z. And when that person leaves, there's a vacuum in the system. All those projects, they go for a toss. And I think in this way, they'll be able to take care of the collective intelligence, and the knowledge transfer would happen on daily basis, like upgradation happening of the team on daily basis.
And people grow faster in an environment like that because they're learning so much.
And, I'm curious because I'm sure people might not say it, but they have their own challenges, they have their own fears, and they have their own insecurities. I personally call them passive aggressive behavior, when they might not speak anything and they would carry that in their heart. They would keep that in their heart. How do you manage that? Because I think if I'm able to sustain in a culture like Menlo's, I'll become a better human being. It will allow my fears and my insecurities to melt down. What do you think? What's the role of
What a wonderful statement to make about a company culture, is that it makes the people inside the culture better people.
Yeah.
I think we've seen that. And I will tell you that this is where compassion for your fellow human being comes in. Most of us know when the person sitting next to us is upset about something. We know it. We might not be willing to speak to it. We might not be willing to open our mouths and say, hey, you seem to be really struggling right now. But we've taught our team some very simple measures when this happens. Ask a simple question. Are you okay? So because a lot of times when we're in conflict with another human being, guess what we want to do? We want to make it about us. Hey, you really hurt my feelings. Let me tell you how you hurt my feelings, and all that sort of thing. Why don't we make
Yeah.
it about the other person first?
Yeah.
Let's have this outward mindset, as the Arbinger Institute refers to it.
Absolutely.
Look at
Absolutely.
the other person and say, are you okay? And then guess what? When you ask that question, listen. Close your mouth, open your ears, open your heart to the other person. Now, if they say, no, I'm fine. Why? What's going on? Well, now the next assumption is maybe it was me. Say, hey, this thing happened yesterday. And let me tell you how it made me feel. Did you intend to do that? Right? In other words, I might have just simply misinterpreted things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so if we can learn, and again, it's not that I make it sound so easy.
It's not that easy. I know it.
I mean,
Yeah.
we are brought up in an environment where we don't share our feelings, or if we get hurt, our first intention is to hurt the other person first. I mean, these are conflicts as old as humanity, right? I mean, these are conflicts that go between nations for hundreds of years. And so, but if we teach our teams simple constructs and we give them a chance, because we pair, we give them a chance to practice these constructs, maybe every single day, guess what? There's growth, there's improvement, there's a blossoming of a culture, not a wilting of a culture.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, I would add one more word here. There would be connection.
Relationship.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
And dare I say, a word that doesn't usually want to come into the workplace, there might even be love.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was about to add that word. And as Mr. Chief Joy Officer of the organization Menlo Innovation, Richard talks about what a joy it was listening to you, Richard. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great
Richard,
to be with you. You did a wonderful job interviewing me.
Thank you. Richard, if you were to give a piece of advice to people who are blessed to have an opportunity to lead a team, lead an organization. I'm not using the word founder, CEO. I'm not using the word who are entrepreneurs or who have the confidence or drive to lead an organization, because I feel all these words have got some element of ego attached to that. I'm saying, what piece of advice would you like to share with them, with all those people who have been blessed and who have been given an opportunity to lead a team, lead an organization, and serve them?
I will simply say that when I give a lot of talks, I see people in the audience leaning over, talking to the person sitting next to them. And I know what they're saying. They're saying, boy, do I wish my boss was here to hear this. Do I wish so-and-so was here to hear this? No. The words I share are personal to each and every person in the audience. I had to start here. I had to become a different kind of leader. And I had to fight all of the lessons I learned up to that point in my career to learn how to not be the number one hero in the room, to not have my voice drowned out the voice of others, to not try and be seen as the most important person, to become that servant leader that we always talk about. And I think even if you think back to the way we interview here, it sets the stage for that. And each one of us can do this. When you step onto the stage of your company, realize that you are the least important person here, and your job is to help support and help everyone else around you succeed. And if we step onto the stage of our companies, no matter where we are, here's my most important lesson I've taught the world from my talks is, you don't have to change the world. You just have to change your world. And that change begins inside of you first. If you become a different kind of leader, a different kind of person, people around you will start to notice who you've become, and they
Wow.
will start to want to be more like you.
Yeah. Yeah. Who you are is how you lead. Reminds me of what Mahatma Gandhi ji said. He said, be the change you want to see in the world. So, Richard, thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom, all your experiences with such a joy. It's a joy talking to you always.